Hi, I'm Tara, and welcome to Les Do Books. You can email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with any questions or comments, or come join our Facebook group, the Lesbian Review Book Club. I'm excited because I'm joined today by Jeannie Levig, one of the other fabulous reviewers at the Lesbian Review and author of 5 lesbian romances. The latest is A Wish Upon a Star, and it's available everywhere from Bold Strokes Books. Welcome, Jeannie.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you for having me, and I'm thrilled to be here.
So you, like me, are a pretty big reader of lesbian fiction. And when we talked about you coming on the show, you came up with what I thought was a really cool theme that hasn't been covered here before, and I think other people will be excited about. Do you want to share with listeners what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah. We started out, Tara and I, when we were talking about this podcast, we started out talking about an area that I've wondered about for quite a while, and those are the books that don't particularly fit into any specific genre. You know, we have the genres of romance and mystery and speculative and historical and all of those, but then there are the books that don't fall into those categories. And I've never really known what to call them. I've heard them called various things, and Tara and I agreed that for this podcast we can call them either general fiction, or in this case general lesbian fiction, or we can call them literary lesbian fiction. And the difference between that and genre, in my understanding, is that each genre has kind of a set of rules. And I'll use romance as an example, since that's such a big genre, any market. And in genre fiction, there are rules that an author is expected to follow, and they're offered as they're a promise to the reader that certain things will happen, and in some cases, certain things will not happen. And in romance, the biggest promise is a happy ending. A lot of people read genre fiction, and what they love about genre fiction is that it offers, because the reader can know exactly what to expect, depending on which genre they read, a happy escape from life, or from, what some people call the realities of life. And you don't find that in general fiction, general lesbian fiction, or literary fiction. Because in literary fiction / general lesbian fiction, anything can happen. Isn't that right, Tara?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely true.
And those kinds of books are, as much as I love many different genres, the category we're speaking of today, it's one of my absolute favorite reads. And yes, I have to be in the right frame of mind for one of the books that we're speaking of today. For that reason, for one thing, a lot of them tend to deal with heavier subject matter. And like I said, you can't have an expectation reading this type of fiction. You just have to be open to whatever happens. So if I'm looking for a happy escape, I don't pick up one of these books or a book out of this category. If I want a happy escape, I pick up a romance, a light mystery. If I want not necessarily a happy escape, but something I can count on, I pick up maybe a historical fiction, something like that. But even historical fiction, a lot of historical fiction falls into the category we're talking about today also. So that's how this podcast was born.
So for people listening, what we're going to be doing is we each have 3 books that we recommend. So just to emphasize again, these are not romances. Don't expect them to follow typical romance formulas or tropes, and don't expect there to necessarily be happily ever afters. Even if there might be somewhat optimistic endings in these, they still really don't fit the typical romance mold. And the reason I call that out specifically is because often in reviews on Goodreads and Amazon, we'll see books like these, even sometimes specifically these books, they might get dinged a little bit in their reviews because lesbian fiction often gets, or lesfic as we commonly call it, often gets perceived as synonymous with romance, that people think it's all romance, and it's not. That's something that we have talked about in other podcasts, that it's really not all the same. So please be kind to these books. These are books that we love, and we hope that you're going to love them too. So, to get started, Jeannie, what's your first book?
My first book is one that I absolutely loved the first time I read it, and I've read it several times since, and I reread it in preparation for this podcast. And every single time, I just, I am just so blown away by this book. And it is Life and Death by M. Ullrich. It's published by Bold Strokes Books. And it came out, I believe, in 2016. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize to Megan Ullrich, but I believe it was 2016. And it is a phenomenal book. As Tara stressed, it is not a romance. It does deal with a couple. It is a relationship book, I will say that, but it is not a romance. It does, and this one, interestingly enough, after all our talk about it, it actually does have a happy ending, in my opinion. It's just, this couple has to go through so much to get to it. But it's a very deep read. Ullrich, I think, was very courageous in writing this book because she incorporated into this book two of the things that, in my experience, can upset readers the most. She deals with infidelity within a marriage, and she deals with the death of a child, both in the same book. So I want to applaud her just for her chutzpah for doing that. And then the way she does it, the way she handles it is just masterful. I don't know how much I can talk about this book without spoilers. Does it have to be without spoilers?
It probably should. Well, do you want me to read out the synopsis? And
oh,
then
yes, I'm sorry. Yes, please read the synopsis.
That's okay. So, the synopsis for this book is: memories and scars are the signs of a life well lived, and more often than not, our milestones are similar. Love, a first home, marriage, and a child. The same goes for Marty and Suzanne Dempsey, but happy memories and years of a life built together weren't enough to help their relationship survive the terminal diagnosis of their only child, Abigail. Coping in their own ways, Marty and Suzanne drift apart and eventually divorce after one finds comfort in the arms of a stranger. The expected and devastating death of their daughter had seemingly severed any ties that remained between them, but an insightful letter from Abigail gives Marty the one thing that seemed so elusive before: hope.
Yes. And I will talk about it without spoilers because it really is due that respect. And for readers who do want to read it, I don't want to blow anything. So what I'm going to talk about is what I already said, just how phenomenal it is that Ullrich tackled these two topics in the same book. And the fact that these are not topics that you would find in hardly any romance novels. And so if this is an example of what Tara and I were speaking of in the beginning, if you pick up this book with the expectation of a romance, you're going to be upset. If you pick it up with either no expectations and open to what the blurb says, you are going to be blown away. Because, like I said, this book deals with those two issues. The very first chapter, you know Abigail is sick, and you know what she has, and the very opening page, the book opens up on the day that Marty comes home and she has signed the divorce papers. And so the very opening of the book it's tough. One part of the book goes from there forward through Abigail's death and through everything that happens going forward. But within the structure of the book, Ullrich also, at the same time, it alternates back and forth between moving from that point forward, and then it'll jump back like a chapter at a time or a section of a chapter at a time, so that you also get to experience from the day Marty and Suzanne meet and date and fall in love and get married. And so you have both timelines going on simultaneously, which sounds like it might be confusing. And I don't know that every writer could pull it off, but Ullrich pulls it off just beautifully. So you're never confused. You're never too overwhelmed with the daily stuff that they're going through in the present, but you're also never lost from that. It's just one of my all-time favorite books. And it has, for me, a very a very spiritual element to it, in that there is so much of a theme of redemption and forgiveness and acceptance throughout the entire book. And it's just a beautiful read, and I highly recommend it to anyone. And like I said, just go into it without any expectations. So that is my first book.
Okay, well, my first book is A Return to Arms by Sheree L. Greer, also from Bold Strokes Books, and actually I also think it was from 2016. And the blurb for that is, when Toya meets Falami and joins the activist collective Rise Up, she thinks she's found her life's purpose. Falami's sensuality and her passion for social justice leave Toya feeling that, at last, she's met someone she can share all parts of her life with. But when a controversial police shooting blurs the lines between the personal and the political, Toya is forced to examine her identity, her passions, and her allegiances. Falami, a mature and dedicated activist, challenges Toya's commitment to the struggle while threatening to pull her back into the closet to maintain the intense connection they share. However, Nina, a young, free-spirited artist, invites Toya to explore the intersections between sexual and political freedom. With the mounting tensions and social unrest threatening to tear the community apart, can Toya find a safe place to live and love while working to uplift her people? This book is amazing. The writing is incredible. It's gripping at points. I was actually, I could actually feel panic mounting in my body in some of the scenes because of the way it was written. And from the blurb, it's probably fairly obvious that a lot of it was inspired by Black Lives Matter and that movement as it was coming up. And the thing that I loved about this book is that it really examines closely how the personal can be so political. Greer has an incredible discussion of intersectionality and how oppression can happen on many sides, because even as these women are fighting for Black people and against police oppression, they're still having to deal with misogyny and homophobia from the same people in that movement. And, she calls out the names of some people who died because of police, like Tamir Rice and Eric Garner and Reiki Boyd. And that kept it very grounded in what was happening at the time, and frankly, what is still happening. And the thing that I love about this story, one of the many things that I love about this story, because it is incredible and I love it on every level. But for me, reading it was a light bulb moment about what's going on in the lesbian fiction genre, and kind of what I was saying about how the genre was defined by romance, but there's room for so much more. That lesbian romance, frankly, what was political, and writing stories about women loving women was a radical act and continues to be a radical act. But we also have space for stories like this that shows that there are other struggles happening and that we need to take them seriously.
That's a really great point.
Yeah, so there's also the fact that one of the characters, Toya, she came from money. Her family was quite affluent and she had to leave that behind. And so when we're talking about intersectionality, there's race, there's class, there's sexuality, there's gender, and these characters have to make a decision about what is more important to them. They need to kind of fight on many sides. How do you do that? Who do you do that with? So yes, I highly, highly recommend this one. Like I said, it's a few years old, but you can get it anywhere. It's on the Bold Strokes website. It's on Amazon, kind of anywhere that you can get books. So what is your next book?
My next book is The Art of Peeling an Orange by Victoria Avilan, I believe is how you say her name. So, and I will let you read the synopsis this time.
All right. Carly Rosen is an artist who, at the beginning of the story, is mad with grief and obsessed with Anna Garibaldi, the woman who stole Carly's fiancé Greg from her on the eve of their wedding. Even worse is the fact that Greg died, apparently on his way to see Carly, sending a cryptic text message to her at the time of his demise. Carly needs to somehow punish this woman and reclaim the memories of Greg's love and the life they shared, so she figures out a way to use her art to attract the attention of the famous Garibaldi. After meeting Anna, however, Carly's obsession transforms into something even deeper. Anna Garibaldi is an enigma. She has very obviously become involved with Greg, but we don't understand why at all. Anna has been a model, an actress, a singer, a director, and an author. It seems like every few years she reinvents herself, and whoever she becomes is just as successful as her last iteration. When she and Carly meet, we find a woman who has suffered immense tragedies in her life and whose loss is ongoing and very present, even as a strange and fascinating connection springs into being between the two women, a connection that first rested on the love each had for the man they'd both lost, but very quickly becomes about so much more. Everything changes when their lives become intensely entwined and secrets abound, driving a wedge between them. This is a story filled with twists and turns and keeps the reader guessing. It's a tale of intrigue and surprises, love and obsession, and joy and tragedy.
Now this book, it's another one. I read this one back to back twice. I actually listened to the audiobook. The audiobook is outstanding. In addition to the fabulous story element, the narration is just so beautifully done. And I listened to it and immediately just sat down and listened to the whole thing again for two reasons. One, because it impacted me so powerfully, particularly the ending. And secondly, because there's so many twists and turns in it that I got to the end of the book and it's like I had to go back through and read it because I got to the end of the book and thought, no way. I mean, there's no, and then I went back to the beginning of the book and basically checked her.
Yeah.
And paid attention to all the twists and turns because I thought, there's no way I could have missed this. And it's like, yeah, there is a way I could have missed it. 'Cause I did.
Uh-huh.
So, but this book, it's exactly what I said. And Amy did a review of this book for TLR, and the synopsis you just read is kind of, I tweaked it, some of the stuff from the review, because I sat down I looked at the actual blurb and thought, no, I don't want to use that. I want to say more about it than that. But anyway, so that's where the synopsis is from. So thank you to Amy for her part of that. But this book is, I'm not even sure what to say. This book has so many just beautifully done twists and turns. And I mean, the second you think you've caught on to what's going on, it goes another way. And it has there's also an underlying, there's a haunting element to it that for readers who really enjoy that, it's a really deep read, and it takes you into, it took me, I'll speak for me, it took me into a part of myself that made me question some things about myself and about what I think and what I feel. And because Anna in particular, she doesn't start, neither one of the characters really didn't start out for me as being all that likable. Because when the book first opens, Carly is, I mean, just completely lost in grief and the need for revenge, which, doesn't present a terribly likable character that you want to spend, 300 pages with. And then Anna is, because the book starts out in Carly's point of view, you don't see any positive side of Anna right off the bat because you're coming through Carly's point of view. And so the buildup of that and the way the characters just step by step change and reform into characters that you just really feel very deeply is just so well done. And I won't give away anything in this book because it would so detract from the book. But one of the reasons I chose this book specifically for this podcast is that I will say it does not have a happy ending. It has a very tragic ending. And the first time I read it, when I got to the end of the book, I went, what? And then and then I thought about it, and I really looked at it, and I thought, this book could not end any other way, and this ending is true to the book. And if she did it any other way, it wouldn't be authentic. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't fit the book. And then I found out that there is an alternate ending that you can download from Amazon. And so I went to the alternate ending, and I downloaded it, and I read it, and I thought, no, this so wouldn't have worked if that had been the ending to the book. And it was your, it was a very typically happy ending, and everybody's having their little kumbaya moments, and everybody's in love, and but it wouldn't work. It absolutely did not work. And then I was in a conversation with the author at one point, and we were talking about the endings and the alternate endings, and she told me that originally she wrote what became the alternate ending. That was the original ending, and she said the same thing. She said it just didn't work. And so there's a lot about this book that puts this book in this category, but the main thing is the ending of the book. So if you do read this book, be forewarned. And if I were to write a review on the book, and I believe Amy did put this in the review that she wrote, there are some triggers in this book, and that is one of them. One of the triggers is that it's not a happy ending, so don't expect it in any way, but expect to be impacted very powerfully by this book. And there are elements of romance in it, because that's what happens. But there's so much other stuff even around the romance. There's, like Synopsis said, there's so many secrets that they both have between them that it's just really a great read in this category. So again, highly recommended.
You're listening to the Lesbian Talk Show. TheLesbianTalkShow.com, your hub of podcast information.
So, my next book is Postcards from the Canyon by Lisa Gitlin, which was released last year? I believe it was last year by Bywater Books. Faced with the sudden and unexpected death of her mother, disillusioned novelist Joanna Jacobs begins chronicling her unruly childhood in 1960s Cleveland, Ohio. But the writing exercise that starts out as a means to reflect and refocus becomes a journal of Joanna's rebellious existence. Jewish and gay, yet unwilling to expose herself to the accompanying scrutiny and rejection, Joanna spends much of her youth fostering chaos and embracing self-denial, even while celebrating an affirming commitment to the psychiatric ward. After an inadvertent bomb threat to a conservative talk show host brings the FBI knocking on her door, Joanna finds herself navigating an unexpected immigrant invasion, a crew of juvenile delinquents in her living room, and a never-ending low-pressure system. When the going finally gets too tough to wrangle alone, Joanna turns to her lifelong friends for emotional support, but this comfort is tempered by a confusing cocktail of lingering hurts, unresolved anger, and resurgent disappointment, making it even more difficult for Joanna to put her life to paper. Postcards from the Canyon is a snapshot of one woman's rapidly changing world where control is an illusion and chaos suffers shelter from an unrelenting storm. This book is literally unlike anything I've ever read in my life. It says that it's 360 pages. I read it on my Kindle, so I don't know if that's true. It didn't feel like it. It is a book that moves so quickly that it feels like you're being dragged by the force of it, whether you're prepared or not for what's going to happen. And it takes place in the present, and so Joanna is not a young woman, and her mother was 90 when she died, and it really did just kind of knock her for a loop. And in a way, it's also like two books in one. Each chapter is told in two parts. So the first part of each chapter is always from the memoir that Joanna is writing. So we're getting a fictional memoir. Mm-hmm. And then the second half of each chapter is... Actually, let me finish my thought about that. So it's from that memoir, and it covers kind of from her childhood until her freshman year at university. And it's told in the second person.
Oh, that's interesting. That doesn't hardly ever happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very different. And it's incredibly immersive because it really brings us right into Joanna's young perspective.
Do you want to tell some of our listeners what second person is? A lot of people don't know that.
I mean, it's the you, right? Like you're doing this.
Right.
Yeah. So as she's writing that, it kind of puts us like we become young Joanna. And we get to feel everything young Joanna is feeling, and we get to see how big her feelings are and how little impulse control she has, which on the one hand is kind of just like kids, because kids have little to no impulse control because their little brains are still forming. But on the other hand, it's also kind of like it's Joanna. That's who she is, because when we see her in the present, she makes these decisions that like I kind of wanted to shake the shit out of her sometimes because they made no sense. You're like, what are you doing? But you can see like so you're feeling like this kid who's doing things and you don't know why you're doing them. And like Joanna doesn't have the vocabulary to explain why she's doing the things that she's doing. And then the second part of each chapter, we come back to where she is in the present, having just written that part of her memoir. And she can be like reflecting on what she was writing. She could be talking about what she's feeling as she's grieving her mother's death. There's in the memoir section, we see like her best friend Molly, who's actually there in the present time as well. And so we find out like what Molly thinks about as she's writing the book, like what Molly thinks of the memoirs and how she's kind of poking at some of her memories. And it's so interesting and compelling because she makes such bad decisions as an adult. Like, they're so bad. And like I just wanted to yell at her, make better choices. Like, literally, one of my philosophies as a parent, one of the outcomes that I want as a parent is that my daughters learn to make good choices. And I don't know that Joanna's parents had the same feeling. But at the same time, the writing is so good in both the memoir section and the present, the novel. Her writing is so crisp and it's so evocative. It's just wonderfully done. And I'm going to read a tiny bit. I did review this book at Lambda Literary, and this is a little part that I put in there. And it talks about that when Joanna is young, she finds a copy of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich on her parents' bookshelf. And she says, you return to the book every day after that, devouring the same nauseating passages like someone gorging on hundreds of marshmallows burnt to a crisp and getting sicker and sicker, but not being able to stop.
Oh, wow.
And for me, the reason why I plucked that for my review is that I felt like it perfectly encapsulated how it felt reading this sometimes. Because Joanna doesn't hide the terrible things that she did. Because when she was in high school, she did some pretty awful things. And it's all there. Like, she just lays it all bare, and I couldn't turn away. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop. And I can't even find the words to describe what this book did to me because, like I said, it's entirely different from my experience reading anything else. I've never read anything like it. Excuse me. So if reading something very unusual, deeply character driven, with really excellent, tight, evocative writing is your jam, then this is a book I cannot recommend enough.
That sounds great. I'm going to have to put that on my reading list.
Good. I think you'll like it.
Yep. Yeah, that's my kind of book.
So what is your last book?
My last book is The Smell of Rain by Cameron MacElvee, and it came out just last year, I believe. Not sure what month, but it came out in 2018. And It is really a great book. And like the others, I've read it several times already. And you want to read the synopsis before I get going here and forget all about it?
I sure do. Air Force Lieutenant and military interpreter Chris Safis fought bravely alongside Kurdish forces in Syria. She fought with some of the bravest and most selfless women she had ever met. She lost her leg during an ambush, and after returning to her home in Washington, D.C., she is plagued with PTSD. She turns to alcohol and prescription medication to block out the memories of her friends dying while she was powerless to help them. Her fiancé Mary leaves her because Chris has all but given up her faith in humanity and herself. Out of the blue, Chris gets a call from the State Department offering her a position as the interpreter and diplomatic liaison for Reha Arslan. I am going to just apologize to the author if I'm pronouncing these names wrong. I'm doing my best.
I know.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Reha. I don't know how
that's
to
what I'm
pronounce
rolling
it.
with.
Okay.
A Turkish national living in exile. She is in America to address the General Assembly of the United Nations and is staying in D.C. before she moves on to New York. Reha is a wise, charming, and elegant woman with her own tragic past. Chris and Reha are an unlikely pair, but Reha teaches Chris that there is beauty to be found in the impermanence of life. Chris's wounded soul begins to heal as a result of Reha's tenderness and insight. Can Reha's love help Chris find her way back to the idealistic, determined woman she once was? I don't know, Jeannie. Can she? I haven't read this book. Tell me.
I'm not going to say.
Nope. Don't spoil it.
This book is it's a fascinating book. Both Reha and Chris, as you can tell, have really, really tragic backstories. There are some scenes that are revisited that are a little bit difficult to read, given that Chris is in war and Reha comes from some very unpleasant stuff as well. But redemption and moving forward is a really strong theme in this book. And what really struck me about it, this book and the storyline of this book, there is a love story in the book. If you really look at this book on the surface, I can see where some people would consider it a romance up to a point. But it isn't that. This plot reminds me of, did you ever read Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy or see the movie Prince of Tides?
I saw the movie when I was 12.
Well, in that movie, I'll use the movie because I don't remember the characters' names, but the character that Nick Nolte plays, he's married, but he's separated from his wife, and his twin sister is going through. She tried to commit suicide, and her therapist is trying to get to the bottom of it before she actually succeeds the next time. And so she starts talking to the twin brother, who is Nick Nolte. So Nick Nolte is working with this therapist, but he's not her patient. And the therapist is played by Barbra Streisand. It's a great movie. Anyway, Nick Nolte and Barbra Streisand's characters, they end up in a relationship, and they actually end up falling in love. But the whole purpose of the relationship, unbeknownst to them, is to bring them both forward in their evolvement, and in Nick Nolte's case, in his healing of his childhood, because he had similar childhood to his twin sister, of course, where all of her problems come from. And he's just repressed them all, and she's repressed them also, but her repression is outpicturing his suicide attempts. So anyway, but the whole purpose of the relationship is to bring them forward so that they can return to their lives whole. The purpose of their relationship isn't happily ever after. And that's very true in The Smell of Rain. Because the relationship between Chris and, what's her name? Reha.
You've read it.
I have read it, yeah.
I suppose I just read the blurb. I should have more than a 3-second memory, though.
I've actually read it 3 times, so I don't have any excuse at all.
Oh, no.
But anyway, the relationship between Chris and Reha is a relationship like that. And it it covers the majority of the book, but its purpose is that for each of them to then move on in their own, in her own way, to what's next. And in the beginning of the book, Chris is in a relationship. She's actually engaged, I believe. But if not engaged, she's living with this woman named Mary. And Mary has given her all in trying to do whatever she can do to help Chris through her PTSD, and, because in the beginning of the book, she's into alcohol, she's into prescription pain meds, she's just all over the place and not recovering. So Mary tries to get her to move to make a move and a brand new start somewhere else, and it doesn't work. So Mary goes, and that's when Chris meets Rhea. And so for the majority of the book, you are in some stage of relationship with Chris and Rhea, and it's very profound, it's very deep, Rhea is so incredibly nurturing, and she knows, because her backstory is different, but she understands like Mary never could. She understands what Chris needs in order to heal. And so again, similar to Life and Death, there's a very strong healing theme. There's a very strong redemption, moving forward theme in this book. And then the ending is I was just so impacted and moved by the ending that I just can't even, I don't want to spoil it, so I can't talk about it, but the ending was just so powerful. And it was one of those books that I just had to sit with it for 2 or 3 days afterwards and just really contemplate the ending, and because there's so many ramifications for both of them to the way it ended. And again, their journeys are side by side, their journeys are similar, but at the same time, they're so different. You really have to look underneath everything that's going on the surface. And it's a very deep read. All 3 of these books that I've talked about today, they're very deep reads. And each time you read them, you go a little bit deeper even. So, but The Smell of Rain by Cameron MacElvee is just an outstanding book. And again, I recommend it highly.
Sounds wonderful.
It is.
So, my last book is Backcast by Ann McMan. Early fans of the podcast are probably laughing right now because I used to talk about Ann McMan on most episodes. It's been a while, folks. It's been a while. And I couldn't not talk about this book. So, the blurb is: when sculptor and author Barb Davis is given an NEA grant to pair original feminist sculptures with searing first-person essays on transitions in women's lives, she organizes a 2-week writing retreat with 12 of the best, brightest, and most notorious lesbian authors in the business. But in between regularly scheduled happy hours and writing sessions, the women enter a tournament bass fishing competition, receive life coaching from a wisecracking fish named Phoebe, and uncover a subterranean world of secrets and desires that is as varied and elusive as the fish that swim the inland sea. Set on the beautiful shores of Vermont's Lake Champlain, Backcast is richly populated with an expansive cast of endearing and outrageous characters who battle writer's block, quirky locals, personal demons, unexpected attractions, and even each other during their 2-week residency. For Barb and each of her 12 writers, the stakes in this fast-moving story are high, but its emotional and romantic payoffs are slow and sweet. This is the first book that I actually read by Ann McMan. So my first experience was not Jericho like it was for so many people. It was this, and it knocked my freaking socks off. I wouldn't shut up about it for probably a year and a half. Clearly, I'm still not shutting up about it because I'm bringing it up now. came out in 2015. I read it very early 2016, and I was so mad that I didn't put it on my best books of 2015 list that I started a new tradition with my best of list for each year at the Lesbian Review, which is the best book I read this year that wasn't published this year. And for people that read her short story collection, Sidecar, one of the stories actually features all of these authors and how they first met at a conference. They all end up in jail together. It's hilarious. And it's just ridiculous. This book is a reunion of all of those characters. And if you haven't read Sidecar, if you haven't read that short story, it really doesn't matter. But this book brings them together so that they all come to this writer's retreat, which I guess is at like a lodge or hotel or something like that. And they're all writing their essays. And it's quite funny as they're like what we see as they're meeting up. They have like the outliners and the pantsers. So like the people who tend to outline their books, people who tend to just fly by the seat of their pants, the people that are in between that they call the panty liners. And they're all kind of working in teams, but like to work on their own individual essays. And it's very funny, very quirky, quite ridiculous. I was laughing out loud in a lot of spots. And the reason why I think this book is so brilliant is that I believe there are as many chapters as there are women there. Because there's 12 women plus Barb. Barb writes an essay too. And each chapter has one of the essays. And it doesn't tell you who wrote it. And the essays are intensely personal. They cover a gamut of things. I think one of them is about, I haven't read it in a while, so I'm hoping, Anne's going to forgive me if I fumble any of these, and I'm sure she will. But there's like a Jewish woman talking about when she got her first period. There's a woman talking about her experiences in a convent and how she was there to be a nun and she fell in love with another woman and how that went. I know. There are stories of, some of the women went through sexual abuse at younger ages, and that's there. And so for people reading this, if sexual violence is a trigger, you should know that this is a part of it. But I mean, that's a very, unfortunately, real thing, or a very real part of life for many women. And I think she was absolutely right to include it. And it's very interesting. There was even one woman who is intersex, I believe, and she talks about her relationship with her genitals and what that means. And so you go back and forth between these really personal, beautiful essays that are sometimes heartbreaking to you're back in the present. Who wrote that? Who's talking about that? Who was so willing to bear it in this essay? But are they talking about it? Or do we sometimes see, because we do sometimes see the ramifications of it later, because at the end you can get the list of who wrote what. And for me, it worked so beautifully as an exploration of what we each do with our own stories. What do we share and what do we hide? Who do we share them with? And how do we share them? Because we're all each telling our own story all the time. And then it goes back to like there's a fish that loves eating tomato aspic and it's ridiculous. And so, yeah, I mean that was the book that kicked off my fangirling for Ann McMan, because again, kind of like what I was saying about Postcards from the Canyon, I haven't read anything like this before or since, and I cannot recommend it enough.
That aspect is so true of so many books in this category we're talking about. Is one of the things that puts them in this category is that you've either never seen anything like them or you've seen very little like them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that should probably be the first element that tells you they belong in this category. You know, if you haven't seen it before, because, you know, like we talked about before, the genre fiction, there's formulaic, you know, and yes, the author can push some boundaries within the formula, but there's still generally a formula there. So if you're reading a book like what you just said and you've never read anything like it before, you're reading one of these books.
That's right.
And if you like it, you can look for some more.
Well, I would say if you like it and you want to look for some more, and you maybe want to ask Jeannie for some of her recommendations, how can people connect with you online, Jeannie? You see how slick I was there?
You're very slick. That's very slick. Can I say 2 more things before I go into that? The first is I had a heck of a time narrowing down to 3 books. And so I am just going to put one more title and author out there and say it fits in this category. It's a phenomenal book. And that is by Clifford May Henderson, and it's Perfect Little Worlds. And it broke my heart to take it out of the discussion today. So I just want to slip it in there. And if you like what you've heard in all the books Tara and I have spoken about today, you will also want to get Perfect Little Worlds by Clifford May Henderson. Okay, so there's that. And if you are looking for these types of books, I am a Bold Strokes author, so I know most about what they publish. And on the Bold Strokes website, under any of these books, you will find some taglines that are links. And any book, all of the books I've spoken about, any of the Bold Strokes books, which are in Life and Death and The Smell of Rain for me, and what was yours, Tara, the Bold Strokes book?
A Call to Arms.
A Call to Arms.
Nope. Return to Arms. I think A Call to Arms is some other really famous book.
A Return to Arms. Anyway, if you go on Bold Strokes and you find the tag link general fiction, you are in this category. And if you click on that link, you will find it will take you to a search results page that have all of Bold Strokes books general fiction titles in it. And so it'll make it very easy to find books that fall into this category that we've discussed today. So now, where am I online? You can find me on Facebook, just under my personal Facebook page is Jeannie Levig, but I also post all of my writing stuff, and that's probably the best place on Facebook to actually communicate with me. I do have an author page that's just Jeannie Levig Books that you can like that, and you can reach me through that, but I'm not as good at noticing personal messages that come in on that one. But if you just want to know about my writing or other books that I'm promoting, that's the one you want. If you friend me on my personal page, you're going to wade through pictures of my kids and my grandkids and my dog and my life and everything like that. So take your pick. So you can find me 2 places on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, just under my Twitter handle is @JeannieLevig. Very easy to find. My website is jeannielevig.com, and that's where any of my own book news and publishing news, that's where you'll find that. There's a bio there. I do have a blog that I post to every once in a while, but don't count on a lot there until I manage to get going on it. But anyway, those are the main places that you can find me online. And I love hearing from readers. I love talking about books. I love everything. So please, if you want to talk about anything, contact me.
That is all for this episode. Thank you so much, Jeannie, for joining me.
Thank you, Tara, for allowing me to be here. This was a lot of fun. And I love promoting the books that impact me so powerfully and getting new titles from you. And I love Let's Do Books. I want to tell you that. I listen to this podcast and I always walk away with a new title, with something to think about, I love this podcast. So thank you very much for having me.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for your kind words.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Tara, and you've been listening to Let's Do Books. Remember to email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with your questions or comments, or if you want more book recommendations, I am happy to send them to you. If you're an author who's interested in joining me on the show to talk about the lesfic you love, trends that have you interested, or your story about how you discovered lesbian fiction, please reach out and let me know. If you've enjoyed this episode, please check out their show notes. You'll find a Patreon link for the Lesbian Talk Show, or you can just visit patreon.com/thelesbiantalkshow. Our patrons get exclusive content that no one else does, like bonus audio from other shows, author interviews, and anywhere in between. Don't forget to join us at our Facebook group, the Lesbian Review Book Club, so you can talk to us about anything that you're reading and loving. You can also find me and all the other podcasters on the Lesbian Talk Show channel at our Facebook group, the Lesbian Talk Show chat group. To find this and many other great shows, all you need to do is search for the Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, or Spotify.